the early 20th century, there was an arms race going on between naval powers. No, not the Anglo-German naval arms race, but the South American dreadnought race. As the powers in South America, such as Brazil, Argentina, and Chile, had vast natural resources and therefore wealth, these countries, having a rather contentious past, decided to spend their money on building up their navies. In this, the Chilean Navy, not wanting to fall behind their neighbors, ordered 2 dreadnoughts from British yards, these being the Almirante Latorre and Almirante Cochrane. Of these, only one would be completed as a battleship, the Almirante Latorre. Like several other ships we've talked about on the channel, Almirante Latorre was seized by the British in August of 1914, where she was renamed Canada, and after her final completion, she joined the Grand Fleet. Participating in the Battle of Jutland, and unlike other seizures or war purchases, the Chilean government purchased her back in April of 1920, going on to serve with the Chilean Navy throughout the Second World War and beyond. She was the last surviving British dreadnought to participate in the Battle of Jutland, as she was scrapped in 1959. Going back to the arms race, in 1907, Brazil had placed orders with both Vickers and Armstrong for 2 large dreadnought-type ships, armed with 12 12-inch guns. On completion, these ships undoubtedly would be the largest and most powerfully armed vessels in South America. Chile ordered ships to match the Brazilian threat, but not until the pair were completed and similar dreadnoughts had been laid down for Argentina and America. However, Brazil was not content with just the dreadnoughts. With further technological development, Brazil ordered the super dreadnought Rio de Janeiro, later HMS Agincourt. Chile ordered 2 large dreadnoughts from Armstrong to the design of J.R. Perret, who happened to have designed the Rio de Janeiro, the 2 Chilean battleships being capable of engaging any capital ship afloat. The original design called for a displacement of 27,400 tons and a main battery of 10 14-inch guns. These guns were expected to be able to match the 14 12-inch guns of the Rio de Janeiro and be able to penetrate the 9-inch side armor of the Rio de Janeiro at the correct ranges. The original design called for 24.7-inch guns as the secondary battery. This was revised as the Brazilian dreadnought carried 6-inch guns, and therefore the Chileans would have the same. Due to the increase in weight, the design top speed dropped to 23 knots. To be fair, this was not too much of an issue as the drop in speed was only about half a knot. The 2 ships, Almirante Latorre and Almirante Cochrane, were laid down in 1911, named for 2 famous admirals of the Chilean Navy. The latter was named for the quite eccentric and interesting Admiral Thomas Cochrane, who had a habit of serving in revolutionary navies when not serving with the Royal Navy throughout the 1800s. Work on the Almirante Latorre began almost immediately, while the Almirante Cochrane had to wait because the ship she was essentially supposed to match and or outperform, the Brazilian Rio de Janeiro, was occupying Armstrong's second set of stocks and was not scheduled to launch until late 1912 or even early 1913. Whatever the case may be, the Almirante Latorre was launched in 1913 and was in the late stages of fitting out in August of 1914 when the British came to inquire about purchasing the vessel as war had come. Like other ships such as Erin or Agincourt, the 2 Chilean ships had a clause built into their contract that allowed the British government to purchase them in a time of emergency. Seeing how war was imminent, the 2 Chilean vessels were taken into British service. As compared to the other war seizures, it is more apt to say war purchase when it comes to the now Canada, as she was given back, while her sister Almirante Cochrane was never completed as a battleship, and remained in a state of suspension until launched in 1918 to be converted into a full seagoing aircraft carrier, this being the carrier Eagle. Several comparisons and distinctions can be made to Royal Navy battleships and other battleships built for foreign navies, but a distinction can be made when it comes to the main battery, as this was something unique for British yards. To take from R.A. Burt's British battleships of World War I, he writes, Canada was armed with a 14-inch gun, which was unique within the Royal Navy. The gun was easily on par with the British 13.5-inch gun. It was manufactured in much the same way, and its shooting qualities were excellent. But only 14 were produced. Of those 14, 10 were mounted on Canada, and the other 4 were kept as spares, with records showing that they never saw service at sea. The secondary battery was placed further aft than an Iron Duke, although it was found that the after guns would have to be removed because of the blast from Q 14-inch turret. Some other distinctions include further placement of the anti-aircraft battery. The shields placed on the 6-inch battery were a new Vickers design. As for armor, much like in the former Rio de Janeiro, Canada was not protected on the same scale as British battleships. The 9-inch main belt was 3 inches thinner than an Iron Duke. It was almost entirely submerged when in deep load conditions, meaning that protection mostly relied on the 7-inch upper belt that could hardly be counted on to keep out the 11-inch and 12-inch shells fired at them by the German battle fleet. In normal conditions, the vertical protection was close to 17 feet above the waterline and 4 feet below. The uniform 9-inch main belt extended just outside of A and Y barbettes, with the forward belt being 6 inches thick, running just past the main belt before reducing down to 4 inches that continued into the forward bulkhead. Aft, the belt reduced to 4 inches thick and ran at around the same distance the 6-inch belt forward, except towards the stern. The 7-inch upper belt ran at around the same length as the main belt, and over this belt was another 4.5-inch thick belt that reduced down to 4 inches forward and aft. Bulkheads were between 3 and 4 inches, running obliquely inwards from the lower edge of the 7-inch belt and joined the outer faces of A and Y barbettes respectively. There were secondary 4-inch bulkheads fore and aft, close to the extremities of the side armor. Barbettes and turret armor varied depending on the specific part, similar to various other parts of the ship like the conning tower and deck armor. Several modifications were ordered when she was taken into British service, that in part delayed her entry into the Grand Fleet. These changes were 1. Remove twin derricks for boat handling and fit new single stump derrick similar to that in Iron Duke. 2. Slight modification of the forward bridge structure. 3. Alterations to the conning position. 4. Fitting of 14-inch and 6-inch director towers. 5. Alterations to the wireless circuits to be as in Royal Sovereign. 6. Wireless installations to be enhanced with Mark III range transmitter fitted. 7. Addition of extra voice pipes were necessary. 8. Slight modification of boat stowage. As for Canada's particulars, she was laid down in December 1911, launched on the 27th of November 1913, and completed in November 1915. She had a normal displacement of 28,622 tons and a deep load displacement of 32,188 tons. Her machinery consisted of 2 sets of Parsons and Brown Curtis turbines that drove 4 shafts with steam provided by 21 large tube Yarrow boilers with a maximum speed of between 23 and 24 knots. The armament consisted of 10 14-inch 45 caliber guns and twin turrets, 2 forward, 1 amidships, and 2 aft. A secondary battery of 16 6-inch 50 caliber guns, 2 3-inch AA guns, 4 machine guns, and 4 underwater torpedo tubes. Her armor consisted of the 9-inch main belt with ends of 6 and 4 inches forward and 4 inches aft, with the upper and sides varying between 7 and 4 inches, depending on the area. The bulkheads were between 4.5 inches and 3 inches, while the turrets had a face thickness of 10 inches, the sides, rear, and roof varying between 3 inches and 4 inches, while the decks varied in thickness from 4 inches at the thickest point to 1 inch. Finally, the conning tower had a maximum thickness of 11 inches. It should be noted that before the name Almirante Latorre was chosen, she was supposed to be named Valparaiso. However, once taken over by the British government in September 1914, she was renamed Canada. But it would take another full year before she entered service with the Grand Fleet, due to the previous changes along with the normal completion of the ship, as that had not been done. Upon entering the service of Admiral John Jellicoe's Grand Fleet, she joined the 4th Battle Squadron, that comprised some of the other oddball battleships like Agincourt and some other war purchases/seizures. She, along with the rest of the Grand Fleet, sortied on May 31st, 1916, to duel with Admiral Reinhard Scheer's High Seas Fleet, firing a total of 42 main battery shells and 109 secondary shells. During the night action, like several other British capital ships, she came dangerously close to German destroyers and large ships trying to make it back south. After the Battle of Jutland, she joined the 1st Battle Squadron, and by March 1919, the ship was reduced to the reserves. Following the war, Chile still needed modern ships to bolster its fleet, and again came to the British for such a need. The United Kingdom offered them surplus warships, including the 2 remaining Invincible-class battlecruisers. The discussion about what the country should do caused an uproar back in Chile. Some wanted airplanes and submarines rather than large capital ships, seeing how they performed in the Great War. Eventually, it was decided that in April 1920, the ex-Canada and once again Almirante Latorre would be repurchased by the Chilean government, as was originally agreed in September 1914, along with several other purchases, namely destroyers. She was formally handed over at Devonport, where she was escorted to Chile, arriving on February 20th, 1921, where the ship was welcomed by the President of Chile. Before we continue, I should say a limited amount of sources exist that provide detail for her service in the Chilean Navy as flagship. Starting her career in Chilean service, where she spent a great deal of time used in ceremonial roles or helping in humanitarian aid, as Chile had earthquakes in the 1920s. Late in the decade, she returned to the United Kingdom for an overhaul and refit. In this refit, several upgrades were made to her armor and anti-aircraft guns. In 1931, the ship took part in a mutiny of the Chilean Navy that ended up not turning out so well for the mutineers. The rest of her career was either spent mothballed or patrolling the seas during the Second World War. There was some speculation that in the late 1930s, the Soviet Union had wanted to buy the battleship. After Pearl Harbor, there is evidence to suggest that the United States had interest in purchasing the ship, as it had been well maintained, but the Chilean government showed no interest in selling the ship. After service and neutrality patrols during the Second World War, the ship was eventually sent to be broken up in February 1959 at a Japanese shipyard, an impressively long career being the last surviving dreadnought to have served with the Royal Navy at Jutland. Sometimes I enjoy going back to the roots of the channel and doing a more detailed video about the specifics of the ship, rather than its story. It's a nice change of pace every once in a while, but I hope you all enjoyed the video, and please remember to like and subscribe as it'll help the channel to grow. And until next time, my friends, have a great week.